pick up right where we left off last week. Last week we looked at a couple of verses of Scripture, and I'm going to read them to you again today. But last week we talked about contentment, the fact that you don't always get to choose what gets put on your plate, but you do choose how to respond to it, right? And so we looked at a couple of verses. I want to look again at some of these verses, pointing out a couple other things. Philippians chapter 4, one of the most, not misquoted, it's quoted correctly, but misapplied, I think, verses of Scripture in the entire Bible. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. We love to use this verse before we're going out on the mission field, right? I can do all things. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. I can say to this mountain, Jesus said this, move and it'll be moved if I have the faith of a mustard seed. I can do all things through Christ. I can leap tall buildings with a single bound, right? I can do all things. I can, whatever God puts in front of me, I can go do it, and I can accomplish big things for Jesus because I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Can you apply it in some of those areas? Sure. But do you know what he was actually referring to when he said those words? The very thing we've been talking about last week and the very thing we're going to continue to talk about this week. Paul is writing to the church in Philippians who've been gracious to him and helped support his ministry. He's thanking him for doing that, but then he's making sure he's letting them know, I'm not thanking you, I'm not talking about this so you can give me more money, but rather, this is what he says. I'm not saying this because I'm in need, for I have learned to be content, whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation. Whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want, I can do all things through him who gives me strength. Interesting, huh? He says, I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength, through him who gives me strength. And I demonstrate that this way, because I can be okay with having nothing, and I can be okay with having a ton of stuff. Interesting, he correlates, if I can do this, I can do anything through Christ who gives me strength. He speaks of contentment in a way that maybe elevates it to a place that we don't necessarily elevate the virtue of contentment. Man, if I can learn to live with absolutely nothing, and I can also learn to live with tons and everything, and I can be okay and secure in both situations, not being remember that Rockefeller mentality, always a little bit more. Whether we don't have much, we always want a little bit more because we feel like we're always in need. Whether we have a lot, we always want a little bit more because it's never quite enough. He says, I've learned the secret, he says, to being content. So I want to look at the secret of contentment today. Recap a little bit what we talked about last week. We talked about how one of the biggest enemies to contentment is entitlement, right? And we looked at a few different ways that plays out. And basically, the entitlement is elevating our preferences to an unhealthy priority. And we see entitlement. Entitlement says, my preferences are elevated so high that I'm going to do whatever it takes to get what I want, right? Others elevate their preferences to an unhealthy priority, and it becomes worry, right? You become a worrier because what if I don't get what I want? What if it doesn't play out like I want? You're so afraid, and it's just a different form of entitlement. You're so afraid of not getting what you prefer that worry takes over. We looked at another thing. When we elevate our preferences to unhealthy priority, we become critical, right? I expect things to be done a certain way, and every time they are, it doesn't matter if 90% of it was good. I'm going to talk about the 10% because it didn't meet my expectations. It's this entitlement that everything should be done the way that I think it should be done. And we look at the picture of an entitled child who refuses to eat the food that's on its plate because I got to have what I deserve, and if I don't have what I expect, then I'm going to throw a fit, or I'm going to start worrying, or I'm going to be critical, or whatever. And we looked at contentment from a perspective of responding when things happen to us that we don't prefer, right? And we learned that you don't always get to pick what gets put on your plate, but we do get to choose how we respond to it. Sometimes God allows things to come our way and we don't like it. It's ugly and it doesn't taste good, and I want nothing to do with it. And yet sometimes it's one of those deals where I realize that I'm not getting up from the table until I eat what's in front of me. I can't ignore it. I can't act like it's not there. It's just, this is the situation that life threw at me, and I have to choose to respond with contentment. Not just complacency, fine, this is miserable, grumbling the whole way, but we also learn that contentment, we're going to talk more about this today, that contentment without gratitude isn't contentment at all. Like, contentment requires a foundation of gratitude. I'm okay with my preferences not being met, and I'm thankful for all that I do have. You know, so we looked at how when these situations come, when our plate gets filled with things that we don't like, we got to choose to respond in joy, right? We got to choose joy in any and every circumstance, because life's more fun when we like more things, right? We choose to find the goodness of God in everything. God doesn't make bad things. The contentment is based in trust. We trust that God's not going to put things here that are going to poison me, so that I can endure whatever's in front of me with grace, knowing that God is not going to harm me, that he's going to watch over me. So we trust that he's not going to bring bad things. And also, again, and we say thanks or gratitude. But what we didn't do really, we talked about what contentment does, but we didn't really give a clear, concise definition of contentment. And as I'm trying to put that together this week, I really struggled. And I look at contentment and go, is this worth 2 weeks of talking about it? I mean, we don't see it that often in the Bible. Paul references it a couple times. It's not one of the fruit of the Spirit. But if you look closely, it really is not one of the 9 fruit of the Spirit, right? Or attributes of the fruit of the Spirit. But I believe it's an expression of the fruit of the Spirit. It's a combination, because what happens, let's take again, if it works this way, if you number them, let's take 2, 3, 4, and 9, okay? We're going to pick and choose some of the fruit of the Spirit here today. Joy, peace, patience, and self-control. What happens if you pour those in a bowl, stir them together? You know what comes out? Contentment. When you begin to learn to approach life with joy, where you can declare, the joy of the Lord is my strength. That regardless of what's taking place around me, regardless of what's happening to me or the circumstances around me, I can have joy, not because I'm necessarily happier or all my preferences are getting met, but just there's this thing inside of me that there's this joy. No matter what's going on, I can find joy. I can find the goodness in everything. There's this joy that stirs up. When you take that and combine it with peace, that when there's chaos around, when the storms of life hit, it doesn't matter if times are hard. I'm not going to get jaded. Or if times are good, I'm not going to grow apathetic. But there's just this peace that transcends life. So I look for joy in every circumstance. There's this baseline of peace that happens all the time. There's an understanding that of the principle of sowing and reaping. You know that principle? Like, you understand it. When you understand it and you realize that the two don't happen simultaneously, that when you sow, there is a time before there's reaping, and patience begins to take root, right? You understand the virtue of delayed gratification, and this patience takes place. And you know that what I sow today will reap a harvest later, and I don't need it today. All of a sudden, contentment starts to stir. And then, when you mix in self-control, I think self-control is like the last of the 9, because it's like, when you don't feel like the first 8, you still have to have self-control. Oh, dang it. Right? When I don't feel like loving, I still have to exercise self-control and act lovingly. Right? And I think that's kind of, it's like the defense of the rest of the attributes of the self-control, right? Even when I don't feel joyful and I don't feel peace and I don't feel like being patient, I still fall back on self-control, and I'll use self-control to continue to walk in health and make good choices and live for Jesus, right? So when you begin to stir all these things up, this joy and peace and patience and self-control, what comes out of this is a life of contentment. And last week, we just began to scratch the surface because like any of the characteristics in the fruit of the Spirit, none of them, I mean, they all work situationally, but they're not designed to be exclusively a situational tool. Like, this circumstance happened to me, let me dig through my toolbox, and here's peace. I'll apply peace to this circumstance. Well, there's an unlovable person. I better dig through and let me apply love. That's not how the fruit of the Spirit is designed to work. They're fruits. I mean, it's a byproduct of abiding in Christ, as we see in John chapter 6. Like, when we're connected to Him, our life begins to change, and He begins to flow through us. And these things are a byproduct of being with Him, which means peace, joy, patience, self-control, contentment is not something we do, it's who we are. It's not something that we apply to specific circumstances. I mean, we do that, but not only. It's a way of being. It's a way of life. So, not every day do I combat issues where there's things coming at me and I don't like it and I need to choose contentment. Unless you're really entitled, then it might be an everyday thing. But most of us, it's not an everyday type of thing. However, I believe contentment is an everyday type of thing. I believe that contentment is not only a reactionary attribute, but it's a proactive attribute. I believe it's not just something that we respond with, but it's something that forms a foundation upon how we build our lives. I believe it forms a foundation upon how we make choices in different areas of our life. And so what I want to do today is talk a little bit about some application of a few of those things. How do we apply, or what does it look like when we apply contentment to some of the most common, thought about aspects of day-to-day living, okay? Last week we talked a little bit more into theory and what happens in a plate full of food. Today I want to talk about practical application. What does it look like when we begin to be led by the Holy Spirit and walk a life of contentment in all things? How does it free our decision-making? How does it change our perspective? So before I do that, I want to give a couple illustrations, then I'm going to tie these illustrations throughout, okay? So first of all, imagine your best friend is getting married, and you are so excited to go to the wedding. Right? You're ready to celebrate with them. It's this grand event. It's this grand occasion. You're super pumped, and you're driving. You're on the way to this wedding, and you're all excited, and you're all dressed up, and you're ready to go. And you've got plans, you got somewhere to be, and you're just full of anticipation. You know how the day is going to play out. It's going to be wonderful. Well, you're driving, and all of a sudden, you don't know how it happened. All of a sudden, like a flash, and the front end of your car is smashed up into a light post. There's a couple other cars that are nearby kind of dinged up, and you just go, wait, whoa, what just happened? What's the first thing you do? You take a quick inventory. Okay, fingers, toes, okay, that, okay, here we go. And you're going, okay, I'm okay. And you look down, and you see that the car is I mean, it's significant, but it's not mangled mess, right? But you look down, and you have this gash, this serious cut through your leg. What's the first thing you do? You stop the bleeding, right? Right, that's the right answer. Stop the bleeding. You look at it and you're like, okay, this is not a little thing. I don't have a sliver, but my pants are soaked, or your dress is soaked, and it's running down my toes, and this is serious. I'm bleeding out. And if I don't stop this right now, or really soon, this could be life-threatening. I mean, I feel okay, but there's this one thing right here, this cut, that this is going to be bad if something's not done about it, right? So the natural first thing we do, we try to stop the bleeding, whatever that looks like. We find whatever's in our car. We're taking on like an outer shirt or whatever. We're doing whatever it takes. We stop the bleeding. Now, how weird would it be if you got in this car accident and you look down and you're bleeding all over the place, and it is going, and instantly you hop out of the car and be like, who did this to me? Well, blood continues to just roll down. And you start rogging around. This is your fault, or what did you do, or how did this happen, or what did you do? And you have no idea whose fault it was. You see a couple other cars, they got, headlight busted out and different things. You're trying to put the pieces together, and you're like, I gotta, whose fault is this? See, that would be weird, wouldn't it? As you're sitting there going, like, if I don't do something about this soon, I'm going to pass out, and I will die shortly thereafter. I got to stop the bleeding. Here's the thing, though. There are circumstances in our life, as obvious as this illustration seems, there are circumstances in our life where we are bleeding and we're refusing to recognize it. And I believe it's rooted in contentment, and I'll show you why. So sometimes a crisis happens. We find ourselves in a bad place. And there's a lot of different ways to respond to this injury, isn't there? There's a lot of different ways that we respond in real life. See, there's sometimes, and this happens to me sometimes in situations when I get overwhelmed, is that I freeze up. Anybody else do that? You freeze up. Like I don't know what to do. In the little things, like if one of my kids throws up, like I don't do well with that. But I try to be a good parent, right? I don't want to put it all on Beth, and I'll go run into the scene, and there's a kid throwing up, and I'm in crisis mode, right? Like, what are the towels or carpet cleaner? That's like, just hand me the paper towels. But it frees up sometimes, and it happens, and that's a simple illustration, but it happens when I get overwhelmed in life too. You get overwhelmed, and I'm like, there's so much unhealth, I don't know what to do, I don't know where to start, so you just freeze. You're like the person that's sitting in the car, I'm no longer going to the party anymore, or the wedding anymore, but I'm not stopping the bleeding, I'm just sitting there staring at it, because I don't know what to do, right? Sometimes we might acknowledge, we might see it, we might get up, and sometimes we tend to refuse to acknowledge it. Now this would be weird in this scenario, really weird in this scenario, right? If you're driving your car and you get this life-threatening slash across your leg and there's blood all over the place, and you got out and you called an Uber and went to the wedding, that would be weird, right? Someone's like, what happened to you? Nothing. Nothing. Did you get in an accident? Nah, I didn't get in an accident. I'm fine. That would be weird, and yet we do that in real life, don't we? We find ourselves bleeding. I'm fine. That's nothing. I'm fine. Or you're at the wedding, and finally someone's like, no, you're bleeding. Yeah. It's just a scratch. It's just a scratch. I'll be fine. Your whole leg is red. No, it's just a scratch, right? See, sometimes we freeze up and we don't do anything. Sometimes we refuse to acknowledge the reality. Sometimes we minimize it, right? We acknowledge it, but I'm just gonna minimize it. It's not really anything. Sometimes we do or just talked about in the illustration. We look for someone to blame. We look for somebody to blame. You get out of the car. Yes, I'm bleeding. But I'm not going to attend to that right now. I'm going to find a distraction by just finding somebody to blame. As you noticed, I did not acknowledge whose fault this car accident was. It could have been yours or somebody else's. I don't know. But you're bleeding out and you're wandering the streets because you need resolution in your own mind that it's not my fault. And so what happens is you go wandering the street, getting more and more close to passing out because you're so consumed figuring out whose fault it was. Really, you're so consumed with finding out that you're not at fault, right? Meanwhile, your condition is getting worse. That's one illustration. Let me give you another one. I think I've told this story before, but it fits today, so I'll tell it again. So there was my sister's getting married in Chattanooga, Tennessee. It's about 2 hours from Nashville, Tennessee, where my other sister is flying into. So myself, my brother, and my dad, we hop in the car, and we're going to go pick up my sister from the airport in Nashville, about a 2-hour drive. So we leave Chattanooga, and we hop on the interstate, or hop on the highway, and we start going. And we're going, and we're going, and we're going. And we're having a great time, by the way. We're just bonding. At this time, we all three live in different states, and it's just this wonderful bonding father, son, brother experience. It's wonderful. And about 2 hours later, when we should be nearing Nashville, we are nearing what appears to be some kind of national forest. And I don't know if you guys have been to Nashville before, but it's pretty urban and not very foresty, okay? And so we're getting into, and the interstate is getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller until we finally are like, okay, we obviously made a wrong turn somewhere. So we get out of the car, and I stop, and we're talking like backwoods Tennessee kind of stuff. And I'm getting out of the car. I'm like, hey, I'm looking for, like, how do I get back on track to go to Nashville? And he was like, what'd you say? Nashville. Well, you're about 2 hours away from Nashville. Okay, well, let me back up here. Started in Chattanooga, 2 hours from Nashville. I drove 2 hours, and now I'm 2 hours from Nashville. I was closer to Knoxville than Nashville. If you know your Tennessee geography, it's not good. Okay, it's not good. So here we are, and we're going like, how did we get here? Imagine if instead of going to the airport, let's put this wedding thing back in. You know, sometimes in life this happens too. I got a wedding to go to, and I'll tell you where we went wrong. We made one wrong turn. In our defense, we only made one wrong turn, and it would just happen to be in Chattanooga. It's the first wrong turn. That'll do it to you. But here's the deal. Let's say we were heading to a wedding. Same scenario, okay? I'm driving in my car. I've got somewhere to go. I'm going to celebrate my friend's wedding. But I make one wrong turn at the very beginning. And I start driving, and the wedding's 2 hours away. And I got other stuff going on, so I'm going to show up right on time. And I drive for 2 hours, and then next thing you know, I look at it, and I'm like, it's 10 minutes till it starts, and I'm still 2 hours away. Or worse, I'm now 4 hours away because I went in the opposite direction. There's different things that we do, right? We freeze. What am I going to do? This would be a dumb one in this case, but cruise control is on, and I don't know what to do. And I just keep on going the wrong way. Or, nah, I'm not. I'm going to make it. I'm still going to make it. I'm still going to make it. I'll be fine. I'm still going to make it. You're going the wrong way. You're not going to make it, okay? Or you recognize it and you minimize it. It's not a big deal. I'm going to turn the car around. I'm going to go back. It's not a big deal. I'm going to be just fine. And you get there, and they're all sweeping up the reception hall. Or maybe you start blaming people. Stupid signs. It was a sign's fault, man. GPS, Google doesn't know nothing. Maps, and this map is all wrong. Man, they should have told me that north is at the top, or whatever it is. You start finding reasons to blame other people. But the reality is you got to take responsibility for the situation you're in. Now you got to do something about it. Here's the deal with those two illustrations. Here's where contentment comes in. Contentment, and last week we talked a little bit about, just briefly, contentment versus complacency. Contentment says, or complacency says, I'm okay being unhealthy. Okay? This bad thing happened, and it just is what it is. Regardless of what your response is, I'm going the wrong direction, complacency says, whatever. I'm okay being lost and not making it there. I'm okay, whatever. I'm okay. Complacency says, when I see that I'm bleeding, you know what? I am probably going to die from this, but at least I get to go to a wedding. Right? Complacency says, I'm okay with being unhealthy. I'm okay with bleeding out. It is what it is, and I'm just okay with that. That's complacency. Contentment is a little different. See, contentment says, I'm okay sacrificing my preferences in order to be healthy. I'm okay sacrificing my preferences in order to do the right thing. So in this car accident illustration, you get in a car accident and instantly, you so badly want to go to that wedding. Like it means the world to you and your best friend that you're there, and it's this huge deal, but you can go and probably die somewhere in the middle of cutting the cake. Or you can just recognize the situation that you find yourself in, and like, okay, I gotta be real. I've got to be a part of contentment, like that you have, an attribute in order to have contentment, you kind of have to, be able to evaluate yourself. And you have to be able to see clearly. You have to be able to see that, yes, I'm bleeding, and I want to go to that wedding, but I've got to say no to my preferences to make a healthy choice. And I don't want to spend the night in the hospital, and I don't want to spend the next few months in doing rehabilitation. But I acknowledge the reality of the circumstance that I'm in right now. And complacency says, it is what it is, leading to greater unhealth or death. Contentment says, I'm aware of my limitations, humbly accept my limitations, and graciously choosing to live within them. Now, when you're bleeding out, it's obvious to see the application. But now I want to just really quickly hit a few very, very practical, everyday life situations that we can apply this to. And listen, I just want to say that one of the reasons that makes it so practical is that there's a lot of us that we struggle in some of these things. And before I say a word, this is not a message of condemnation, but a message of I want us to walk in peace and joy and patience and self-control. I want us to reap the fruit of contentment and the joy and the grace of contentment. But I think there's some of us today that our perspective is so off we don't even understand or we can't see the discontentment that's flourishing in our lives. So I want to talk about 3 specific areas that I believe if we begin to walk in contentment, not as an application to a problem, but as a life thing, it'll change the way that we see aspects of our lives. The 3 aspects I want to look at as our financial health, which is a real easy connection because Paul talks directly about that, our physical health, and a healthy schedule, our time, our finances, our physical health, and our time. And I'm just going to touch on these really, really quickly. And first you go, what does it have to do with contentment? Bear with me. So here's the deal. Sometimes, let's talk about finances. Because, in 1 Timothy chapter 4, Paul's talking to Timothy, and he's speaking of people who think that godliness plus contentment, or godliness is a means to financial gain. And so he's backing up and saying, no. Godliness doesn't mean to financial gain. That's where he says godliness plus contentment is great gain, not financial gain, great gain. And he goes on to warn us about the mentality of just a little bit more. And he begins to speak a little bit what that contentment looks like. And so I want to see how it applies to these everyday aspects of life. Our finances, our physical health, and our time. Let's just be honest. These 3 topics, most of us probably think about these 3 topics every single day of our life. I would also probably say that these 3 topics may be the 3 areas that cause us the most headaches in our life. So what does the Word of God say about these things? What are the principles applied to real life? Because here's the deal. You didn't come to church just to talk theories about God, did you? No, we come to church to exalt God, but then to allow His Word to be the mirror of our lives. And sometimes I don't like what I see in the mirror. And I'm going to be really, really honest. As I was preparing this week, I was just like, I don't want to say those things because then I have to acknowledge those things, okay? So here's these 3 areas. Financial health. First of all, let's look at that. This happens. We live in a society, again, that we talked about last week, that caters to our preferences. But sometimes we get in a car accident, don't we? Sometimes there is a collision in our finances. And it happens of naturally one of 2 ways. Either something happens, let's say, since we're using a car accident, let's say Okay, this car accident created issues where you had to be in the hospital for the next 6 months. Now you get out of the hospital, and what happens to your the expense line on your budget? You have this astronomical medical bill, don't you? And it's not going away for a long time, right? And all of a sudden you're going, okay, there's a collision in my finances. Something has happened here that has changed what used to be. I was going a certain place. Man, I had plans of buying a new, bigger house. I had plans of retirement at a certain age. I had plans of having X number of dollars in my savings account. I had plans to be able to go on X number of vacations this year. I had plans on whatever it might be, and something happens that, boom, crashes your plans. And now we have a choice to make, don't we? Right? If our expenses are humongous and our income hasn't changed, or worse yet, we've been in the hospital for 6 months and our income decreases, but we'll just say it doesn't change. There's something we've got to do with that, isn't there? We're bleeding. Our finances are bleeding. And here's the natural response when we get into a situation where our finances are bleeding. There's a few very normal things that people do. They freeze. And spending continues as it always has, and you just keep bleeding out. Friends, you can only do that so long. Or they refuse to acknowledge it. All right? I'm just going to stop looking at my bank statements. You giggle, but it happens. I know I'm not meeting my budget, therefore if I don't look at it, it doesn't exist. Or we acknowledge it, here's a real common one, but we minimize it. Oh, it's not that bad. Oh, I'll be back on my feet in a second. Oh, it'll all balance itself out. How? If your expenses don't change and your income doesn't change, it won't fix itself. It's walking into a wedding with a deadly wound going, it's just a scratch. It'll pass. Or we start looking to blame, right? Man, the medical professionals and and the insurance company and the government, it's their fault. Okay, whether it is or not, you're still not meeting your budget. And sure, find fault and whatever you want to do. Or you can just be gracious that this didn't happen in a third world country and you're just dead. Truth of the matter, it doesn't matter whose fault it is, fault doesn't change your circumstance. I think we forget that sometimes. We search for fault because we want to find fault so that, I don't know what we expect to find in it. It just takes the pressure off me. Oh, okay. Whew, at least I know I'm dying and it's not my fault. Here's what contentment requires. Is that we humbly acknowledge our limitations. Okay, well, I can either get a second job, which is going to cause conflict in one of our other ones here a little bit, or I can decrease my expense. Oh, I've already gotten rid of all of my undesignated expenses, and it's just bare bones now. Okay. It might be time to sell a car and put it towards some of that you owe. It might be time to sell your house and downsize. Like, whoa, but come on. That's a lot. It is, and I'm sorry for that. But there are people living in smaller houses than you live in all over the city and all over the world who are plenty content. So you can continue to bleed out and stress and worry with anxiety and all these things that are eating you away, or you can choose to acknowledge your limitations. I don't make enough money to live like I always have. And so I have to make a decision. I'm going to cut somewhere. Maybe it means I don't eat out one time for the rest of the year. Maybe it's a little thing. Maybe it means I cancel my cable and Netflix. Or, I can't believe I'm going to say this out loud, but or your internet. Or what if you just had, oh gosh, what if you only had a landline? Here's the deal. I don't know your financial situation. I just know the common trends. We look at what doesn't work and we freeze, or we ignore, or we minimize, or we cast blame. Contentment doesn't mean I'm okay bleeding out. Contentment means I humbly recognize my limitations, and I graciously choose to live within them. If you're taking notes, I want you to write those two statements down. Contentment means humbly acknowledging my limitations and graciously choosing to live within them. Contentment means this is where my boundary is, and just because I prefer to live beyond that doesn't mean I get to. Right? You go, well, I don't need a 10-bedroom house and a swimming pool indoors and outdoors and a bowling alley in my house. Great, you don't have billionaire preferences, but human tendency is to have preferences just a hair above what we can afford. We're Christians. We don't live like the world. We live different than the world. We live a life of following Jesus. So if there's stress in your finances, find a way to create margin in your finances. And it might take drastic changes or it might take subtle changes. And you need to find that margin. Because here's why. It may not take 6 months in the hospital. For some, your budget is so tight that if your car breaks down and you have a $500 expense, you're bleeding out with no way to right the ship. Now, I realize there's some people who you're finding, I can't go any lower. And there are some realities of that. The majority of us can make decisions, can change our preferred lifestyle in order to find peace in our finances. I think the number one most unused budgeting tool in America is contentment. And if we could learn how to live with contentment, live contently with less, friends, and take care of a whole lot of stress. I want peace and joy and patience and self-control. But sometimes I just have to humbly acknowledge my limitations. This is where I am. This is what I can afford. I will graciously choose to live within that. And again, gratitude has to be a part of it. Don't do it begrudgingly. Well, okay, still, begrudgingly is better than not doing it at all, I guess. But contentment is found when we find the gratitude in it. Tragedy strikes, but God, I'm thankful that you still provide housing for me and my family that's not comfortable, but at least I have a place some shelter over my head. Okay, I can't eat exactly how I want to, but thank you for providing what you have for me today. Contentment is understanding our limits and graciously living within them. I'm running out of time, so I'm just going to touch on these other two, and I'll let you fill in the blanks, but our physical health is the same way. And I know this is a touchy topic, I'm fully aware, and I'm not just talking about weight issues, I'm talking about health in general. Listen, here's the deal. We have to stop casting blame and then allowing that to be dismissive. Like, I struggle with being healthy, whatever that means to you. I struggle with being healthy, and I don't know. I just, and so I don't know where to start. So what do? You freeze and you continue your same behavior, or you, I'm fine, and then the doctor says otherwise. Or yeah, I know I'm not healthy, but at least. Or you begin to blame, it's genetics, or it's my job that I sit around all day, or it's this injury that I had that I can't exercise, whatever, I can't move around, whatever. Listen, I'm just telling you, like, we have to take, not responsibility in that it's our fault, but we have to own where we're at. And on this issue, there's some who have lived unhealthy for a really long time, and listen, if we've been going on an unhealthy direction, if I've been traveling to Knoxville for 10 decades, right? Like I'm not gonna arrive in Nashville overnight. But contentment means, it doesn't mean I'm just fine with it. I'm fine being unhealthy. I'm fine being unhealthy. Contentment, that's complacency. Contentment means I'm okay with sacrificing my preferences so that I can choose a healthy lifestyle. This isn't just health class. Guys, this is my goal for my whole life, and I got a lot of work to do still. I want to be in a place where God can call me to do anything at any time, and I'm physically capable to respond to whatever it is that he wants. No matter what. I'm not successful in that all the time. I got work to do, as we all do. We got to stay on top of this thing. It doesn't just happen easy for anybody. But, and some people are like, oh, it's easy for you. You're high metabolism. I got a low metabolism. Okay, sure. You can point fingers. This person has, they're on their feet all day long in their job, and I'm sitting down all day. Okay? We just have to acknowledge it. It is what it is. It's not supposed to be fair. It is what it is. But we still have to make healthy choices in our finances, in our health. And the last thing I want to talk about is in our time, the way that we spend our time. I hear it's so often, hey, how are you doing? Busy. I mean, I know we are. But again, it's our choice. We all have the same amount of time, and how we spend it is on us. I realize that some jobs and some different stages of life require different amounts of time. I understand that. But I talked about margin in our finances. I believe we need to have that same margin in our schedules. Try this. If you're the type that you're always scurrying, I'll tell you what, a life of being 1 minute late for everything is one of the most stressful places to be. Isn't it? It's anxious, and you feel that weight, and you're always rushing. You want to do whatever it takes to show up early everywhere, and there will be a freedom that lifts off your schedule. Try it for a week. Try it. Show up early everywhere you go, and watch a peace infuse your schedule. The number one thing, this is one of the 10 Commandments too, is you want to find peace in your schedule. You're just running ragged, and you don't know how you're going to you don't even know. You don't want to think about tomorrow, because you're going to wake up tomorrow and start running until you go to sleep again. You know one way that's going to help you do that? God knows what he's talking about. It's called the Sabbath day. That's not an Old Testament thing. Well, it is an Old Testament thing. It's also a creation thing, which means it's also a New Testament thing. Rest once a week for a whole day. I don't have time to do that. You don't have time not to. Rest. That can look like a lot of things, and I'm not going to talk about it today. But what I'm saying is this: if we can be content, not cramming my schedule with one more thing. I can be content saying no to a good thing for the sake of the pace of my life, for the health of my life. I can say no to different, just for my physical health, and say no to whether it's movement stuff and exercise stuff, or no, I say yes to that, I guess. No to my preferences in those things. If I can say no to some spending that I have to get under control, listen, we'll be such much more healthy church family, because I want to be free to serve God as he desires. I want my finances to free up so that I can give way more. I run into people who have way less money and make way less money than me, who give more than me, and I'm like, oh my word, I want to be generous, but generosity demands discipline. God, make me content with what I have. God, make me content with less. My physical health, God, make me content with not getting what I want, fighting through my preferences. God, on my time, on my schedule, God, help me to sacrifice my preferences and what I'd like to do for what is going to bring health in the long run. Joy, peace, patience, self-control. It's what's at stake here. Let's be content. I went way too long today. I hope, whatever. It is what it is. You're all still awake. I believe this is a topic, I almost cut it short, but this is something that we collectively struggle in. The Church of America struggles in the area of contentment. We are so catered to that it's so hard to deny our preferences. But I want health in my finances. I want health in my physical body. I want health in my schedule so that I am free to serve God to the fullest capacity that he's calling me to. I want to be like Paul, that at the end of my life, I can say, I've learned the secret of this, of being content. with much or with little, I found contentment.